Sir, in 2016, you told the UN Security Council on Syria, and I quote, "The one constant in this violently unpredictable conflict is that neither side will win." Considering the events that followed Turkey's recent incursion, do you still stand by that?
Well, you see, territorial victory seems to be the writing on the wall, is that Assad, the government, has won thanks to the help, clearly, and strong help from Russia and Iran. Now, no one really can question that, and the intervention of Turkey or anyone else is not going to change that. The writing on the wall is in that direction. The issue is whether the government, who has won territorially the war, is now able, capable, intelligent politically enough to win the peace. That is the issue. That's why the political discussions now are so crucial. Without that, it will not be a victory. It will be a ruined country with a divided environment. That's what I meant, and I still stand for.
At the end of 2016, the World Bank estimated that the cost of reconstruction would be $450 billion were the war to have stopped the following year in 2017. Given what is going on with the US trade embargo and various others, roaring inflation, will Syria ever be rebuilt? And if so, where will that money come from, sir?
Well, that we will have to ask donors for that. But let me say the following. The reconstruction of Syria, which is likely to be around that amount of money if it was perfect, it can be less than that. We were talking about 350 billion, but that's a huge, huge amount of money. Maybe some of it coming, not from the US, it's clear. President Trump has been very adamant about it, and his decisions have been clear in that direction. But from Europe, perhaps from China in part, and from international institutions. Why Europe? Because Europe does not want the refugees, more refugees to come, and would like rather refugees to return, even those in Lebanon or in Turkey. And that has a huge political and economic cost. But they will ask in change, stability, sustainability, in other words, a credible political process. They've said so, and it's likely. That's why these meetings in Geneva are important.
President Trump said late last month that he is not only willing to keep troops in Syria to secure oil fields, he is willing to go to war over them. Robin Wright, who is a seasoned regional watcher, wrote in the New Yorker the following: "The president was wrong on so many counts, seizing the oil after twice ordering all US troops out of Syria violates a basic international treaty on war." And she adds that it may amount to pillaging. What do you make of President Trump's comments? And does the US have any real influence over Syria's political future?
Well, my personal comment is that I do not believe it's only about oil, because if it was about oil only, it's a very small quantity of oil, and I don't see that to be the only reason. So one should ask, what are the other reasons? So one could imagine one reason would be to still have a leverage regarding the future political process. But even if that was the case, it is not sustainable in a long period. One, because the international law that everyone is saying believes in, integrity, national integrity, territorial integrity. And by the way, this applies also to the long term of the so-called buffer zone. In other words, national sovereignty is supposed to be respected. And B, honestly, I believe also that all this cannot be sustained for a too long time, because it gets very complicated in terms of presence with few soldiers in a territory which is not totally friendly.
The late former UN envoy to Syria and one-time Secretary General Kofi Annan described the job as, quote, mission impossible. While you were in the job, The Guardian described you as the man with the toughest job in the world. The National wrote you inherited a poisoned chalice. A year into the job, you told The Guardian you can't shape the situation, but you can shake it. Did you shake it enough?
Well, small history will judge that. What I can tell you that I agree is true. When I got the job and I got the offer and I had hesitated, I felt also that that was mission almost impossible. But you see, Becky, I wanted not to be a diplomat. I wanted to be a medical doctor when I was a young man. And finally, I was convinced that perhaps I could be a doctor of countries. I speak many languages and I had that motivation. What does a doctor do when there is a disease that you cannot treat? You give up, you resign, you live? Well, then with Alzheimer's today or some forms of cancer, no. What you do is you try to save as many people as you can. You try to interfere with the disease. You give hope. And perhaps tomorrow, after tomorrow, there will be a treatment found. And there will be a moment, which maybe now, when everybody seems to be wanting to wrap it up. That was, I thought, our job, our mission. And I want to believe many people were saved through that.
I just wonder whether you bit off more than you could chew. How do you reflect on your time as UN Special Envoy to Syria?
As a very difficult, sometimes profoundly frustrating moment. But it was a war where there were 6 armies involved, there were 15 countries involved, plus a big chunk of Syria was controlled by Daesh, ISIL. So you can see, and the government was strong and totally refusing to want to discuss with the other side because they thought they were going to win and the opposition thought they were winning too. So at the end of the day, what I needed to do was keep the limelight on the issue, because the worst case scenario when the world starts saying, the so-called CNN effect, if you want a compliment, when you start forgetting about the country and people then just look at statistics, people dying. Second, to continue pushing to make sure that the civilians would not be abandoned. And I don't think we did that. In fact, that's why the government was annoyed with me. I was constantly pushing, and so was some of the opposition.
Journalist David Kenner wrote in The Atlantic that even you, the quote, diplomat, couldn't solve the Syrian civil war. He said there are few Syrians under the illusion that the international community can affect the course of their lives. And I quote him here saying there are few diplomats who would honestly say that they have a blueprint for changing that reality. What is the role of diplomacy in today's changing world order?
Well, this is a major issue we are debating these days, and now that I'm a little bit freer, I am involved in it. The so-called multilateralism, in other words, crisis solved through many countries working together, seems to be in a crisis. And we start seeing more and more, look around the world actually, might is right. Human rights, forget them. All type of discussions within the UN to solve an issue. Now I will show my strengths and then I will call the UN to actually package my victory. That seems to be the attitude at the moment, not only in Syria, but it won't be able to last. Without the UN, i.e., in other words, the capacity of putting together at least a formula of face-saving for everyone, you will not have a sustainable peace. You will not have a reconstruction. Think about Ebola, about development issues, about the crisis. Look at the people in the streets these days. So I know it's a bad moment for UN multilateral principles, but we should not give up because there's no alternative to that. No single country, neither a superpower, can handle this issue on its own.
Stefan, I want to bring up finally a photograph of your father. He was left stateless without a passport in the Second World War. What impact did your father's experience have on your 4-decade diplomatic career?
A lot, you can imagine. There were 2 impacts I had in my choice of choosing only UN war zones, 21 in 47 years so far. One was the humiliation I saw in the eyes of my father when I, as a Swedish at the time, then I became also Italian national, went through the custom, through the borderline And I was waiting for 2 hours until they were questioning my father whether he had any means to actually stay on the other side. As a 5-year-old young boy, I went back and said, leave my father, come back. He's my father. And they would look at me. That had an impact. And the second impact was when I was in Cyprus. I was 19 years old, and I saw a child on the Green Line shot by a sniper. And I got such a indignation, outrage, healthy one, I want to believe. And I said to myself, why? Shooting civilians, where actually these guys are both men and they should be fighting between them. And that kept that fire in me until now. So both had a huge impact, Becky.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's former senior advisor tried and failed on multiple occasions to get him to show support for then U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, as Team Trump was trying to undermine her. Michael McKinley testifying during his impeachment deposition that he told Pompeo, quote, wouldn't it be good to put out a statement on Yovanovitch? Since my impression is the department, at least tried to keep her in Ukraine. When asked what was his response about Pompeo, McKinley responded, he listened, that was it, sort of thank you. That was the limit of the conversation. Well, the issue, according to McKinley, came up 2 other times, including when McKinley went and spoke to Pompeo to resign from his post. McKinley testified that he again brought up the State Department publicly backing Yovanovitch. Quote, I was pretty direct. I said, the situation isn't acceptable. So those are very direct, right? This is what he's testifying under oath to. This is why what Pompeo said when he asked about whether McKinley approached him about publicly backing Yovanovitch sounds so strange.
From the time that Ambassador Yovanovitch departed Ukraine until the time that he came to tell me that he was departing, I never heard him say a single thing about his concerns with respect to the decision.
So you were never asked to put out
not once, George, did Ambassador McKinley say something to me during that entire time period.
You were never asked to put out a statement in support of Ambassador Yovanovitch?
George, again, I'm not going to talk about private conversations that I had with my most trusted advisors.
Michael, okay, you see McKinley's testimony, and then Pompeo is specifying, a certain date, right, a certain period during which he says that this conversation did not occur. And then when George Stephanopoulos says, well, did it ever occur? He says, well, I don't want to talk about my conversations. Was Pompeo being less than forthcoming in that interview by trying to be so specific about the date and not answer the actual question?
Well, you can't get a sharper contradiction between what Ambassador McKinley testified under oath and what Secretary Pompeo was saying on TV to George Stephanopoulos. I think this is going to make it pretty difficult for Pompeo to avoid saying more, including, if not testifying before the House committee. It's pretty clear that no senior administration officials are going to do that. But it's also pretty clear President Trump is going to be impeached, and there will be a trial in the Senate.